Well, good evening to everybody, and welcome to another episode of Unfiltered Conversations. I'm not drinking coffee, I'm drinking tea for once. I have to start out with that just to make that disclaimer known. Darren witnessed me make my first cup
I
of
did,
tea.
and the problem was he didn't make it properly. So
I put honey in it.
what the
And it
hell is
needs,
that about? Honestly, you
well,
Americans, you need a lesson in tea making, don't you?
well, we can give you a lesson in tea if you really want to go down
Yeah,
that
I know,
road.
but the colour of the Rappahannock is already tea coloured anyway, so it doesn't matter.
How's
Tea
the
belongs in harbors.
speaking of harbors and
Oh,
tea?
Tim, don't wind me up now.
Tim,
Come on.
welcome aboard, man. It's good to have you back.
Yep.
Yeah, good trip.
I hear you just came off a super awesome excursion, and if you would like to share with us what happened this week, we would love to hear it.
Well, went up, visited some family up in Boston, and went to saw a couple historic sites on the way. Went to Morristown, which was a site of a Continental Army encampment during the Revolutionary War, on two occasions, 77 and 76, 77, and again 1779 to 1780. Pretty good location. Couple reconstructed huts. They're rather large for the period. 12 men per hut. They pretty much cut down like 2,000 acres worth of trees. It was the coldest winter ever recorded
Wow.
in America. Pretty much every harbor from South Carolina to Maine was iced over. Yet, surprisingly, only 100 men in the encampment died. Compare that to Valley Forge, where hundreds died. So that was an interesting location. And then up in Boston, went to Minuteman National Park, which includes doesn't include Lexington, though I was there as well, but includes the North Bridge battle site and what came to be known as Battle Road, where as the British were falling back to Boston, they were basically harassed the whole route. It's very similar to other reclaimed battlefields. 60 years ago, there were houses all along that, and they've all been demolished in the area, returned to its period state. So that was pretty interesting. Compared to Civil War studies, it wasn't much more in a skirmish in terms of casualties.
Right.
But that there's more to it than casualties. So, Brandy Station didn't have a ton either, but it is still famous for being the largest cavalry battle in America. So a lot of people read casualties into importance of something, and that's a little upsetting at times. But yeah, it was a good trip.
Good. I'm glad to hear it went well. I'm actually going on one myself this coming week, and it's one of those ones I guess it's Civil War related because I'm going to speak on a topic about the Civil War, but I'm stopping at a place that isn't necessarily Civil War related. Well, there's some ties, of course, because everything weaves in and out of that. But I'm going to the Johnstown Flood National Historic Site, which I'm really, really looking forward to being able to go to and spend some time at. So, of course, obviously, there's going to be something done on the page about it. I haven't even began to think about how we're going to make that work. But we'll swing it when we get there. But I'm going to take some pictures, going to do a couple little videos while I'm out there, and maybe take some videos without sound so that I can go back later and put some sound over it once I give it more of an in-depth study. I'm really having to pick and choose kind of how I'm going to swing the return trip from Columbus, Ohio, whether I'm going to go to Johnstown alone, because I've been told that you can see some stuff from the visitor center, but obviously the visitor center in the site isn't actually in the town of Johnstown itself. This is actually up a little bit out on what was the dam and the lake that was there, the Lake Conemaugh or Conemaugh Lake, however you want to call it. So that's where the visitor center sits today, and obviously that flood reaches all the way down the plain and goes, I think, about 14 miles down to Johnstown. So obviously, with that being so far out, you could probably spend a bit of time at both, the dam site and the town of Johnstown, including the cemetery, which has a row of 700 unmarked graves from the flood itself, which would be a nice, I think, tribute and worth the stop to see for sure. So I can see that easily making a whole day out of that one trip alone, and that would potentially mean needing to land at night at Gettysburg and wake up the morning and finish off that leg of the trip in Pennsylvania there. So I'm reworking, because I wanted to initially go to Allegheny Portage and a place known as Flight 93, which is a very popular site as well, obviously. But it just, between the three, I'm having to maybe narrow it down to just Johnstown, which is okay. I'm pretty set on wanting to see that. Tim, have you ever been? Do you know much about it? Is that?
I mean, I know the story of it. You know, it was largest natural or deadliest natural disaster in American history for
Natural.
a long time.
Yeah.
But yeah,
That's it. I'm sure too. I want to find some Civil War connections too somehow to make the story. I'm sure they're very popular, or at least common, with it being 1889 when this happens. You still have plenty of veterans alive, and I'm sure there are quite a few that live somewhere around Johnstown that were affected by this, if not in Johnstown itself. And there's that. And Darren, you've just come off of a battlefield yourself, right?
I had the most amazing day yesterday. So I have family up in Northamptonshire, live in Northampton itself, actually.
Okay.
And in that area, in the East Midlands of England, there's a lot of English Civil War battles take place. And one of them is the most important battles of all, which is Naseby. And I went there. And honestly, the battlefield is amazing. So obviously, some of our battlefields are not well looked after, but a charitable organisation called Naseby 1645 went out of their way a few years ago to go to all the main important spots and put signs and platforms up, you know. And yeah, I went to pretty much, I think I missed one out. It was quite, it's a big battlefield, you know. I started at the furthest point away and then I worked my way in, but it was amazing. And yeah, it was good.
they were interesting videos you did.
Pages. Sorry, mate.
I watched them all. They were pretty good.
Did you enjoy them? Yeah.
I did.
Again, I wasn't trying to, talk about the history of it. I was more interested in showing people that it's there, you know, because what frustrates me is especially when I went to the Cromwell Monument, and oh my God, what an amazing view of the battlefield you get there. I had goosebumps. You know, again, as we always say, if you don't go on a field, you'll never understand it. And you can see both ridges from that point, and you can see the point where the two armies met each other and slaughtered each other in this little bowl in the middle. Oh my God. I mean, you can't walk on some of it because it's actually private land, most of it. It's been, it's 370 odd years ago. It's farms and, all sorts. But,
I keep forgetting how far back your history goes in comparison to ours. We had
one of them was a Salisbury hedge. Now, the Salisbury hedge has been there since, I think, 13 or 1450 something. And the dragoon, and so it's an important part of the battle and it's still there. And I actually had to take a video down because when I got there, I got so confused of where I was. And it took me a little while to get my bearings of where this action took place. And eventually I did find the actual spot. And you can still walk along that same spot from 370 years ago where a guy called Oki and his dragoons dismounted their horses and shot into through the hedges at the Royalist cavalry as they marched or charged down the battlefield. Okay. And those hedges are still there. You know, they're in pristine condition. That was the hardest to get to. That was a trek. But again, who doesn't like a trek if you're you like walking a battlefield? I actually quite enjoyed that more than actually just driving up and getting out and going to the monument, Mm-hmm. It's just more enjoyable.
So it's up to you guys if you want me to do it or not, but I have just finished this week, Tim, I talked to you a little bit about it this week, finished reading The Heart of Hell, which is The Soldier's Struggle for the Bloody Angle by Jeffrey Wirt. I finished reading that. The new one that's out there on the Bloody Angle. Would you guys care to hear how I felt about it?
Yeah, go for it.
Sure. Okay. So one of the things that I got really, really excited for in this book was new information. I had the impression that reading this book, it was going to give me this huge revelation of things that happened at the Bloody Angle that I did not know. Something that could help me piece more to the story than I had already been able to piece together and share with other folks. it really didn't do that for me to the fullest extent that I expected. Did not know at all. And most of those came in the form of quotes or accounts from other soldiers from unpublished sources and manuscripts. But as a whole, the book really serves as, I think, one of the greatest ways to make sense of the bloody angle. Because it is a very confusing action that really throws a lot of folks off when you get there. I mean, some people don't even realize that the bloody angle is only of the entire mule shoe. A lot of people go in there with this conception that the mule shoe itself, this huge salient, is the bloody angle, and all of this concentrated fighting that's, we're hearing about 22 hours of hand-to-hand fighting in the rain, and this is really concentrated to only one section of the mule shoe salient itself, which is why it gets dubbed the bloody angle. And I think the book does a really good job of describing not only how the soldier is involved in this and how the soldier is going about their experience at the bloody angle, but also it kind of weaves a little bit into the memory aspect as well. Like, what did soldiers think about the bloody angle? Throws a little detail about how the stump goes from Spotsylvania all the way to the Smithsonian. And I mean, a lot of us may know that already, but again, that's something that's an interesting story that many folks may not know. So for, many people that know about the bloody angle and maybe have May 12, 1864 pretty well, in their head, and they can, I don't want to say lead a tour, but lead a tour, sure. If you're on that level, you're not really going to find a lot new, which is completely okay, because here we have, in my opinion, potentially the Kickstarter to gaining a new audience into the Civil War, and this is a book that could do that.
Yeah.
Because it's not the overload of info up to the point of May 12, 1864. There's so much in so little, pages. There's so much detail in so few pages, I should say, that really help to narrate the story up to that point, to where you're not having to read about all the political bullshit.
I think that's the problem sometimes with Civil War literature in general, is that you always have to have that stuff before you get to the main juicy part,
Absolutely. And that's what I think Jeffrey Wirt does such a good job at doing is, okay, I don't need to go into vivid detail every step of the way to the war up to this point.
No.
You could write a whole 800-page book.
You just want to go straight in, don't you?
Exactly. And that's exactly what he does.
That's cool then, yeah.
He gives the wilderness a short but extremely fair treatment to get you up to speed as to what's happening on May 12th. And he covers May 12th well. And I was thrown back at first when I was reading. I was like, darn, I kind of let my emotions get the best of me there. I was like, damn, this isn't really hitting. I didn't think, but the more I started reading, the more, okay, this is a fantastic book. So if you guys have it in your stores, if you see it online at Amazon, if you see it at UNC, grab it.
Another thing I want to say, can I just say another thing as well? People don't realise that there's a second attack on the 18th, which is in exactly the same position. Is that correct?
I watch a lot of things based on the Civil War. Brace Face on YouTube. Thanks, man. I'm glad to hear that.
Sorry, So the 18th, it's the same attack, isn't it? Exactly the same place, exactly the same men.
No.
It's further to the south.
Oh, is it? So it's not actually on the mule shoe itself then?
No, and the mule shoe by that point's gone.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a burial trench at that point. A very rudimentary one at best. They're just literally piling bodies.
So most of the Confederates have got hot-tailed it out there by then.
Well, they've all hightailed it to what they called Lee's last line at that point.
Yeah. Okay.
So, Darren, there's a reason that the fight lasted. Lee really kind of knew going into this that this was going to be a position that wasn't a very long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was proven, obviously, on May 10th when Upton was able to shatter the lines with his force there. That was only 5,000 men in that 12 Regiment Brigade there. And then you have 20,000 men when Barlow, Hancock, and all those guys are smashing into this work. And then you have the 6th Corps coming up, and elements of the 6th Corps are now hitting the works too. This is being kept up all day because Lee is feeding troops into this melee because he's trying to occupy the Federals there, buy more time in order to build that line there in the back. That way he can bring all his forces back to this one concentrated line. that's not the mule shoot. And I think that's really why Lee keeps sending so
And
many.
am I right in saying that he orders his artillery off the field?
He does, because initially
that also doesn't realise there's going to be another assault, because they're constantly trying to race each other, aren't they? They that period over the Overland campaign, they're constantly trying to outmaneuver each other, and it's literally a race to the next place, isn't it? It's like, right, come on, let's go, you know.
I always thought it was interesting. After Upton's attack, Lee had issues with the salient before the attack, then Upton's, and he has another 48 hours or so, or less than that, at least, going on 36 hours where he could have built that last line and withdrew beyond it, but he never did. And I always thought that was curious no one gives Lee much flack for that, yet he loses good commanders. He used, Stonewall Division no longer exists after that. And yet no one blames Lee. I'm like, no, he had a problem with it. He knew it was untenable before Upton's attack, yet
and that's the thing. I point it. Lee is the absolute blame. He holds all of the blame for the mule shoot. I agree with that. And basically complain to his underlings, hey, I'm sorry, this is not a good position. What are you going to do about that? Instead of taking it into his own hands and like, all right, this is really bad position. Obviously, my corps commanders aren't really in the headspace to deal with something of this magnitude. Maybe I should step in. Lee knew how to fix that situation too.
I always thought it interesting that of the two senior commanders, Grant gets flack for May 12th. And I'm like, Grant did the most responsible thing that a commander could do. He saw a tactic that worked, knew that it would work again. Yet, I think he underestimated, coordination, how easy it was during the Civil War, or how difficult it was, I should say. He believed that it would be easier to, you're going to break through with the corps. Well, then, what then? To get a division of troops that are shoulder to shoulder to go left, straight, right, and clear out this rather huge position. I mean, it's one of those, concept was good on paper, difficult to carry out, but it was worth the attempt. Whereas Lee learned nothing from May 10th.
Right. No, there's nothing he didn't. And it shows his, he's really angry and he's really kind of outgoing, especially on the 10th, about how upset he is that Rhodes let this happen. And he really does blame Rhodes entirely for Upton's assault. He doesn't blame Doles as much, the guy that's actually captured in this, or wounded, I think he's even wounded. But Lee's not doing anything. He's blaming Rhodes.
Then he loses Johnson and all those units, and then he blames Ewell.
So Tim, we had this conversation last week about the butcher stuff and all that, and Lee bled his army more than Grant did. I mean, we spoke about this last week. The Peninsula Campaign, when he takes over during that campaign, he bleeds that army right to the point when they get to Antietam, they haven't got enough men, and that's another reason why they lose Antietam is because they are exhausted as well. They've been fighting, God knows, 14 weeks in a row or whatever it is, or not in a row, but you know what I mean. But he's more of a butcher than Grant, isn't he?
I mean, I don't know that it's fair really to label either. I mean, Lee's reacting off of tactics and stuff that he knew. Yeah. But I think it's easier to you see these occasions where Lee's like super involved on the battlefield, right? He's super active at the Wilderness. He's super active at Spotsylvania. To an extent at Antietam.
Suffering.
Well, each one of those were instances where you can argue he made mistakes that led up to that. Antietam lost order, and he's all over the field, shifting troops, albeit to the greatest extent he physically can, given that he's injured, having hurt his wrists. Wilderness, he didn't insist on his troops, fortifying and checking. And that led to the Hancock's near breakthrough of AP Hill's lines. So then Lee's, right in the midst of it. You have the whole Texas Brigade, Texans always move them stuff, lead to rear stuff. And then he's right there at Spotsy trying to do it again twice, right, Ty?
Yeah.
And each time, no one ever said it that he got that involved. But I wonder if it wasn't because he recognized some mistake that he made and he tries to personally make up for it.
Because that's the thing. You always hear that he gives out the orders and then just lets them get on with it.
Until he didn't.
Hear of him being that involved. I never hear that. You always hear right, he tells Longstreet what to do and Longstreet does it. He tells Jackson what to do. Jackson just does it.
Well, curiously, he didn't do it at Gettysburg, which you could argue that.
Yeah.
But at Pickett's Charge, what was he going to do? He had no troops to grab to fill back into that. But he did ride out and meet them and try to rally. And there was the only time he openly acknowledged his mistake. I'm not saying any of this to besmirch him or anything like that, but I do find that relatively curious that there's been all this flack for the casualties that Grant took during the Overland campaign, yet you can make an argument that each one had a reason, whether you can argue whether that was founded or whether it was worth the risk. A lot of people, even though nothing came of it, his attack across the North Anna, the need to then, if he was going to reinforce either side, they'd have to do 2 river crossings to do it. And
Lee's out of commission for North Anna, isn't he? He's in his tent with an illness, isn't he?
Yeah.
He can't do nothing. And also he's just lost Jeb Stewart and he's just lost Longstreet, hasn't he, at that point?
Well, he's lost 2 corps commanders plus Stewart. So
he's got literally nobody left, has he? He's like, what do I do?
He's got AP Hill, who was probably sick or may have been sick, who knows? But he's got
allegedly.
He's got Anderson.
Thank you, West Point.
Yeah,
you got a gift that keeps on giving at West Point. And that's what happened.
And one thing I've learned today, because I'm listening to something really good at the moment about the command of Lee's army, and it goes into Longstreet, and people don't realise how close Lee and Longstreet are. They've actually got a better relationship than Jackson and Lee. And in actual fact, Lee's an oddball, as you know, Tyler. Mm-hmm. And in actual fact, apparently none of his staff actually even liked Jackson because he was so strange. Apparently he'd sit on his own. Whereas Longstreet was really sociable and really if there was something going on, like a card game or a bit of drinking, Longstreet's there. You wouldn't see Jack. He had a really, really nice way about him, apparently. So, the Gettysburg naffs things up a little bit, I think, don't it? But at the same time, the lost cause writers play to that, don't they?
Truthfully, my knowledge of Longstreet to that regard is very slim. I haven't sat down and give Longstreet any true.
I think you definitely need to give him some time.
And I have the equipment to do that.
Very interested, I'll tell you.
I've got the new book on Longstreet that Colonel Harold Knudsen wrote, and then I also have the Longstreet at Gettysburg, a reassessment, which I really would like to read too. I also have Jeffrey Wirt's classic Longstreet bio on the shelf somewhere, so there's no shortage of stuff to dive into a little bit of Longstreet if I need to. And I feel like I do need to. I feel like this general definitely deserves some type of.
Oh, he's definitely. I'm warming up to him now after listening to Gary Gallagher talk about him in this series. This lecture series.
Very controversial after the war.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
that's the problem. After the war.
I think Knudsen's book is actually a reprint. It's a republication. It came out, I think, going on 20 years ago. But Corey Farr's books are, one's brand new, the other's only a few years old. But I think Longstreet's a figure who definitely needed a reevaluation. Because he did suffer very much like Grant for so long under various lost cause-isms.
Yeah.
So
he really got bashed, didn't he? And a lot of them were the guys that he was in the army with commanding. That's the thing. That must have hurt. Oh yeah. The reason they do is because he turns Republican, don't he? and he has his political career, but also he's friends with Grant before the war. So, but so what,
And something I got to give Frank O'Reilly some props for this, because he showed me something really cool that I've never even realized. And it's a whole thing that him and I, just kind of get the backstory of this. We were discussing stuff about how I viewed Upton from 2016 to when I've now, read enough about him to where I'm giving talks and doing a few further researching on Upton. But one thing I told him, it was funny to watch the switch from the letters that he writes pre-war. So start of the war. He's just now coming into the war. So I'm reading letters on how he feels as though property and the pomp and circumstance of war as it is being carried out, where there's like a disregard for people's personal property and private items. He thinks it's disgusting and he thinks it shouldn't be done. Well, in 65, right at the end of the war, when he's coincidentally on a cavalry raid with Wilson's raid in Alabama and Georgia, he's praising destroying property, burn it all to the ground, to hell with Georgia, to hell with Alabama. So I brought up to Frank, I was like, it's interesting to see that switch from how he's coming in and very strict military to the core, doesn't want any type of blemish on his career, to hell with it, let's burn it all to the ground. That's the switch that he goes through. And Frank's like, that's funny you bring that up, because just today I've been thinking about this switch, about how Confederates identify as a Confederate from a secessionist or a, pro-state right, or one of those identifications. And he pointed me to a book that I really, really like, and you two might know it. It's John Castler's 4 Years in the Stonewall Brigade. The first letter he writes home to his parents is the one that threw me off. And he pointed out, he said, look what he says, and if there's anything that sticks out to you. And I read it twice because I didn't catch it the first time, so go back and look at it again. And he says this day, and he's referring to the First Battle of Manassas, was the largest and grandest battle that the United States has ever seen or will see. What about that sticks out to you guys?
It was small by later war comparison.
Yes, that's true, but there's something even more between the lines there. He said United States. He's not identifying as a Confederate. He's not identifying as a Southerner. He's still identifying as somebody in the United States. He's still implying that Virginia is within the United States, even though here we are fighting a civil war because Virginia has seceded from the Union. And then he went on to explain other, examples of, there's a company in a Mississippi regiment called the Confederates, which has much more of a bite than Confederates. I mean, you just say these are the Confederate soldiers. No, these guys are the Confederates. There's a bite to that. So there's a switch between identifying from, someone who's protecting your rights or whatever you're going to fight for at this point, no matter what side you are, but there's always going to be that switch. In this case, the Confederacy, there wasn't an identification with the South or being a secessionist in a wholesale form. You're finding instances like Castler saying that he's still in the United States on other accounts as well. I'm sure there are hundreds of other ones I could probably find. But it was something that really interested me, is there's always that switch in a soldier, some way, shape, or form. Again, we can all say, okay, obviously the Civil War had at some point influenced them, but I want to take that step further and be like, where in the Civil War did they switch? Because Upton maintains his views up until close to 65, and then it switches. And so I already have quite a few places I can already tell you I know where he's starting to kind of take a turn in his writing. And we're looking right around June of 1864. And for those that know, Cold Harbor plays a huge role into why this switch happens. It's something worth looking into. I thought I was really interested in going further.
No, I think that's interesting. I mean, you see that switch happen in several. I forget. Came across an account recently. Basically, said the same thing. A senior officer who in '62 was not all about. It may have been Haskell, who died later, of course, but he wasn't about destruction of civilian property. But others definitely underwent that switch. I don't think like Hancock did. Hancock was never really involved in any of that. But it'd be interesting to see if, Sheridan had ever said anything like that and then became, notorious for burning out the valley. I mean, we know Sherman never did. He probably would have done what he did from the beginning of the war if he'd
I'd
been
like to think so. Sherman is Sherman. He's his own entity, man.
Well, I mean, you got to give the guy credit. He saw the way it was going to go down.
And that's the way it had to go down, I'm afraid.
I'm not throwing any shade at Sherman. I actually like Sherman.
I think that's the only way it was going to stop the war or finish the war, end the war.
Yeah, I
He
mean,
had to do what he had to do.
To be honest, I mean, it's kind of, you have to think, I mean, we just got done with the 160th for the Peninsula campaign. And let's say McClellan hadn't got cold feet or whatever, or been McClellan and actually had pulled it off and won the war in 62. Where would we be today?
I think it'd be a mess.
We wouldn't have, emancipation wouldn't have been a thing at that point. Would it have solved anything, or would we have been fighting a couple of years later? Would it have immediately gone to insurgency? It's hard to tell. So, things work out, I guess, for a reason.
It's a really good what if, that is. I like that one.
It is.
It's got the cogs turning in my head.
Jeez. Turning, the wheels are going, Darren.
Wow. Yeah, because I don't think it would, like you said, I think maybe it initially would have stopped, but then would have carried on some other way.
Well, what happens
some of the real southern states,
Yeah, what happens
with that? Maybe they would have just moved the war there, I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? Because the South still had the manpower at the time.
Of course, it had loads of
keep
manpower.
Doing things.
I mean, you got states like Georgia and Texas; they're not going to give up, are they?
At that point, they wouldn't have seen a reason to. Mississippi,
none of them. Yeah,
about the only states that would have been out of it at that point would have been Tennessee and Virginia.
But again, without the Army of Northern Virginia, it's like they always say, that is the main army, isn't it? Technically,
Yeah.
And that's the way they looked at it then. Robert E. Lee is the main man. That's it. That's the way, that was their mindset, wasn't it?
Yeah.
After he took command, it was.
Yeah, it's like, yeah. Although at first they hated him because they were like, oh, this is Granny Lee. He's really slow and defensive and this, that, and the other. And how mistaken they were.
And all that.
Yeah. But yeah, they're really interesting. Actually, it's got me thinking now.
Yeah, I mean, it was just something too that I had just a topic of conversation with Frank when we were talking about that switch, and he pointed that Castler one, and that really had my wheels turning too, Darren. I was like, oh my god. Something as little as that, really, really does mean more than we could even imagine.
I mean, Richmond though was the epicenter, and as far as producing stuff for the Confederacy. So if you do knock out Richmond, I suppose you just move it somewhere else. But I mean, that iron foundry in Richmond was just churning out the stuff, wasn't it?
We're talking
they had others they could have. I mean, it would have hurt, but. They had works down in Augusta, and Atlanta was still.
Well, yeah, Atlanta was quite important, wasn't it? Yeah.
So, it wouldn't have been good, especially losing, the Virginia manpower. But people also overlook the fact that I think North Carolina contributed the largest number of troops to the Confederacy, not Virginia, though Virginia, a lot of people assume that Virginia did.
So also, what about this then? So it's a little so say that happened. What happens to Lee then? Do you think Lee, because he always says, I'm fighting for my state, not fighting for the Confederacy, technically. So would he bow out of the war?
Tough to tell.
Because, apparently he was only ever focused on Virginia. He didn't really care what was going on anywhere else.
Yeah, oftentimes the detriment of the cause. For Confederacy, probably would have.
Because Braxton Bragg's not going to do a lot, is he? Oh, the useless bloke he was, eh? Sorry.
You're not a Braxton Bragg fan, I take it?
Nobody is, are they? Who likes Braxton?
I think there's only one Bragg. I won't call you a supporter, but apologist, maybe.
You're not, are you, Tyler? You've never told me this before.
You need to read the Braxton Bragg.
Apparently, I heard a thing. Apparently,
tell you what.
Yeah.
You read some Sheridan books there, Tyler. I'll read your Bragg book.
You got yourself a deal.
Well, apparently, during the Mexican War, a shell landed in his tent, and it's a shame it didn't go off. That's what I heard, anyway.
Who, Sheridan?
No, Bragg.
Oh, Bragg?
I mean, I've sympathized with the fact that he had some.
He has some
not even borderline insubordinate people.
He does have some difficult people. He's got Leonidas Polk himself. God freaking
Well, he pays for his insubordination.
Dude,
guy gets a shell right through his chest.
You think so?
That's what happened. He got shell right through his chest.
Did he? What, in the Mexican War?
No, that's how Polk died.
Polk, yeah.
He took the shell on the Kennesaw line before the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain. Union artillery shell went right through him.
Apparently, the scariest moment for Bragg is when Mr. Nathan Bedford Forrest comes in his tent and tells him what for.
Well, that's an interesting story.
And he basically told him, "You don't do, I'll kill you."
Yeah, he's like, I'm not
going to remember the story now, but
jeez,
he survived that one. He must have crapped himself.
Yeah.
And the thing too about Bragg, the Chickamauga thing gets me real bad. Is you have Polk virtually just eating breakfast when he's supposed to be launching. He's back behind the lines with
having a Polk sausage.
No, he's having a whole big and gravy and muffins and brunch and mimosas.
Oh, there he was.
Oh man, he's just back there.
Well, that tended to be a Confederate thing, and you have Pickett at the shad bake.
You have Pickett on a fish fry in the middle of.
Somebody put a funny comment. They put on Facebook. They put unibrow. He definitely had a big caterpillar on his head, didn't he? On his forehead.
If you believe the NDF story. Yeah. I don't know. I've never heard the Nathan Bedford Forrest story, so I'm not sure.
Bragg raided Force unit all the time, sent troops and then basically ordered him away. And Forrest didn't react kindly and basically said, I'm not taking orders from you anymore. I'm going off to do my own thing, and threatened him. He could have, Bragg, the reputation Bragg has, you'd think that he wouldn't have had any compulsions about ordering someone to seize force and having him shot, but he didn't do that. Was it because he was scared of him? Who knows? But it is an interesting story.
Sure. And again, this is what I love about the American Civil War is these so many interesting stories. So many interesting different characters, and we stand here and we criticize a lot of these people, but they're so interesting, all of them.
Of course they are,
and it's just amazing. I love it.
Well, guys, we're about here at our end time tonight, so we can get this up. The next video from our birthday celebration will be up probably in the next few weeks. It's going to be split into two parts because it's too long as it is. split that into two parts.
It's a
and
big
try to
one.
Get that over on
It's a bit like our World War II one, Tim. That was a big one, wasn't it?
It was 2 hours.
That was 2 hours, yeah.
That's about how
And
long
then,
the birthday
did
celebration
you know
is.
Terry Rensel likes to talk in my latest podcast? That is nearly 2 hours.
Oh, that's a long
But I'll
one.
tell
That's
you
fun.
what, that guy is the funniest guy I've ever met.
That's
He's
a fun.
hilarious. Can you believe this guy drove from all the way from Alaska to Fredericksburg? But what made me laugh at, he goes, "Oh, it was all right. I stopped at a few national parks on the way." It seemed like a road
It's a good way
trip.
to break it up.
And then he said he listened to Ron Shero's Grant.
Yeah.
Was it 42 hours long? He said,
That's a
Jeez.
long book to listen to.
Whoa. You know, I said, I couldn't believe that, mate. How did you do that? He said, no, it was enjoyable.
Well, no, Terry's a good guy. Marina and I just had lunch with Terry a couple weeks ago, right before he left, or a week or two ago. He went up to Pennsylvania, so he's up there now. But when he comes back, we'll have to get together for another beer.
Yeah,
and
we'll do.
have some
Anyway,
tea with Darren.
Thanks for it's good to see you again, Tim, mate. Yeah.
Absolutely, Tim. It's always awesome having you on here, and I really appreciate all the videos you put up when you travel. We all love those
definitely,
things.
yeah.
and
Keep them coming.
My pleasure.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you guys for joining another episode of Unfiltered Conversations. Check this episode out on Spotify once it becomes available, and we will see you guys on the next one. Take it easy.